tell me, Randy, what's been going on these last couple of weeks? I know that the ash borer beetle's been found over in Moorhead. What does that mean for our area now that this is working its way further north and likely probably on the opposite side of the river as well?
Exactly. That's probably been the biggest question right now with emerald ash borer being found. And bear in mind, it was first found in the U.S. over in Michigan in 2002, and it started to spread. So I mean, it was more or less a matter of time before it was going to be found here. So like the city of Moorhead, and I know the city of Fargo and other cities as well have done a really good job of not planting any ash trees once emerald ash borer was found. And then they've also done a really good job of reducing the ash tree populations in the area, especially those that were planted under power lines or they already had dieback and they weren't worth saving. So that has helped. But since it's here, and it was found just north of the Moorhead High School, so the general recommendation right now, if you have ash trees that you want to protect and they're within 15 miles of that infestation, come this spring, you're going to want to look at doing some type of an insecticide application on those trees. And unfortunately, you're either going to be doing that yearly or probably every other year for the life of that tree. And what has been found in areas where they have emerald ash borer, if you're not treating with an insecticide, chances are really good that your tree is going to succumb to the damage from emerald ash borer.
Right. So tell me, how does this beetle, this emerald ash borer, how does it affect the trees? How does it kill them? Is it a disease they get after the fact, or are these bugs just straight up killing the tree themselves?
It's actually the larva. So the emerald ash borer is a beetle, and the larva, the eggs are laid by the female on the bark of the tree, typically in that upper canopy. And then when those eggs hatch, they will burrow through that bark and then they start feeding on the phloem. And as those larvae get a little bit larger, they do end up hitting a little bit in that xylem as well. So basically, they are destroying the conductive tissue within the tree. And then when you get enough larvae in that tree, you start noticing canopy dieback. And typically for a healthy ash tree, after 3 or 4 years, uh, the the insects will kill the tree. And again, it's mainly the larvae that are causing all the feeding damage beneath the bark.
I see. So when these things are spreading further east and further north, and they've been doing it pretty slowly, if you think that they were first found over in Michigan, I believe it was that you said in 2002, and now it's 2023, they've just been found north of the Moorhead High School. What is it the weather, the climate that's been slowing down this move? Is it hard for them to withstand the brutally cold winters? And if that's the case, is there a threshold or a number that if we hit like a certain degree of being cold for a prolonged period of time, is that enough to kill off the the larva or something like that? You see the direction I'm going with it? Is it the cold that kind of slows them down or that can kill them?
Great question. And I would assume there probably is a point where it would be cold enough where they wouldn't be able to survive. I think, unfortunately for us, it's not going to happen. Granted, very cold years in the prairie is that we really have no large stands of ash trees. Where other parts of the country where they have very large um, forests where it can spread a little bit more. And for Minnesota, it was first found in the cities back in 2009. So it certainly took a while um, to get to Moorhead. And very likely how some of these have spread is through the transport of firewood, because if you cut down an infected tree and if you cut it down before those beetles emerge during the growing season, then you're moving those larvae around to new spots, and you pile up that firewood, and then they're going to go through that development, emerge as beetles, and that's how it can spread too.
So, Randy, I've got a couple of questions, and you mentioned an insecticide application that would have to be sequential year after year. Does that insecticide then last through just the growing season? What's the longevity on that? A lot of insecticides have to be reapplied after a rain system, but apparently that's not the case when we're treating for the emerald ash borer.
That is correct, depending on how that application is being made. Some of the most effective ones are going to be systemic insecticides that even as a homeowner, you do have options because there are insecticides you could purchase and then apply. And typically you're mixing these up in a pail of water. And the amount is based on the size of the ash tree, typically measured 4.5 feet off the ground. You're either going to be looking at a diameter, sometimes it could be listed as the circumference, but one of those two measurements, and then you pour that right around the base of the tree, and then the root system will take that up. Of course, that's being driven by the foliage because it's transpiring, and then that moves throughout the tree. For larger trees, for homeowners, typically, if your tree is greater than 15 inches in diameter, measured at 4.5 feet off the ground, you're going to want to look at having a tree injection done. And for that, you're going to want to hire somebody to do that. And basically, they're drilling holes, small holes, right around the base of the tree, and they're going to inject that insecticide in there. With trunk injections, there are some insecticides where you can get at least up to 2 years of longevity with that insecticide. So they're going to cost probably a little bit more just because of the product. But again, you would get at least 2 years of protection on that. There are other options too, because when the adults emerge, they have to feed for roughly 2 weeks on ash foliage. So there is an opportunity that if your trees were leafed out, you could spray them with an insecticide in the hopes that the beetles themselves are going to feed on that, and then they're going to die. Granted, that's not doing anything with the larva on there, but the other drawback is if your ash tree is of any size, it is nearly impossible to prevent overspray when you're spraying foliage on a larger tree. Therefore, the systemic insecticides, again, whether they're soil applied or they're injected, those are probably going to be the main options that people are going to be looking at.
So Randy Bryan emailed and said he has a pest that usually rears its ugly head in March or April. It's called tree roots in the sewer. He said, do tree roots grow in the winter? And is there a good product to put in the toilet to rid me of these troublesome roots? What do you know about controlling or possibly getting rid of them? It's a good question.
That is a great question. Yeah, certainly he's not alone with that issue. And probably the key thing to remember is that tree roots are not going to, say, create any holes or any cracks in a sewer pipe. But if your pipe is cracked, they will certainly exploit that crack, move into there. And you think about your sewer pipe, it's not always full, but you have plenty of nutrients and you're going to have moisture in there, which means it is the perfect place for tree roots to grow, and they will explode within there. Same is true for tile line. I've seen it where they've moved into tile line as well. This time of the year, there shouldn't be, I don't think there would be any growth happening to say, but late in the fall, I mean, it could be growing quite late in the year because, temperatures around 35, 40, you could probably get a little bit of growth yet. So, I mean, it's going to grow for a good majority of the growing season. I don't think there's really any growth taking place right now. As far as a product to put down to get into that sewer line, nothing's coming to my head right now. I would certainly suggest calling a plumber that you trust and get their opinion on products that could be used. And maybe it could be the case that they're going to be looking at perhaps getting that line replaced or repaired just to prevent this. Because really, regardless of what you do, unless you remove the tree, you're likely going to have that same problem again because those roots are going to regrow even if you do kill them.
Good answer, or a good question, Brian. Sorry, Randy. Yeah, and there are a lot of people that I know. My neighbor, they had that happen to them, and they had to come and just uproot all of their whole entire sewer system. It was just a mess.
So I do want to go back to the emerald ash borer questions, though, you guys. And Randy, can that ash borer affect other trees besides ash? I mean, I know it seems like a straightforward situation with that pest, but just wanted to see if it will use another tree as a host as well.
In our area, we're not going to have to be concerned about another host. And actually, for the longest time, it was thought it was just ash trees that would be affected by that. But back in 2014, there was a paper published where they found white fringe tree, which is actually in a completely different genus than ash, was also serving as a host. And that tree, I know there's a few of them planted in the very southern part of Minnesota as ornamentals. I'm not aware of any around here just because I think it's just too cold for them to survive. But they can also serve as a host where the emerald ash borer can complete their cycle. But from everything I've read, ash is the preferred host for the pest.
Okay, that makes total sense. And what if folks are concerned, they think they may have a problem in their trees? Any symptomology to look for aside from just finding the borer itself?
Some things you can look for, and actually right now, maybe one good thing with all the snow that we have around the area, woodpeckers are wonderful biosurveillance. If you have an ash tree and you notice there's a lot of woodpecker activity, and usually the easiest way to see that is if you have a lot of what they call flecking. So you have bark, little pieces of bark that are just covering the snow, and maybe you're even hearing those woodpeckers. It doesn't mean that you have emerald ash borer, but keep in mind those woodpeckers are going after some kind of larva, some kind of insect in that tree. So if you have that happening right now, it would be a good idea to get that inspected just to find out what they're going after. And you could certainly call an arborist or a trusted tree care outfit to further investigate that. During the growing season, some things you can look for would be canopy dieback. The emerald ash borer female will lay her eggs. Typically, they start higher in the canopy, and then as that larva population builds up, they'll move lower. But the challenge there is, we're talking about that upper canopy. So you really need to get up into the tree in order to start seeing some of that damage. And typically what has to happen is that you're going to be peeling some bark, looking for those S-shaped galleries beneath that bark. But again, for a homeowner right now, if you notice any woodpecker activity, I would certainly keep an eye on those trees during the growing season. If you start to notice some odd canopy dieback in that upper crown, that would be another indicator that it could be emerald ash borer.
So if someone is experiencing those symptoms, and or maybe that they just straight up find the beetle, the larva in their ash tree, is this something that should be reported? And if it is reportable, where should they go to do that?
If they're in the city of Moorhead, I suggest contacting the Moorhead Forestry to let them know. You can certainly contact me too at the extension office, and I can make that connection. I know coming up in April, the Department of Ag will be here to try to delineate exactly how far this infestation is, because at this point, nobody knows how long it's been here. So, there's certainly a chance that it could be wider spread than just that neighborhood, but there will be a survey going on. So again, in the city of Moorhead, I'd certainly contact forestry. If you happen to be in another city where you do have a forestry department, you can certainly report there. Like I said, you can report that to me as well, or even the Minnesota Department of Ag. You could also make that report, especially again if you're going to be outside of the known infested area, because the goal right now is just to try to reduce the spread.
And Randy, I'd like to kind of take a look into spring a little bit because, well, we're stuck in, I think this is January 77th today. So I noticed when I moved up here, I didn't know what it was on my lawn until my neighbor told me, spring or snow mold. So once the snow starts melting, is snow mold going to do any harm to your lawn? And if so, what can we do to prepare for that if we have a tendency to get that on our lawn every year?
Generally speaking, it's not going to kill your lawn. That said, back when we've had years where we've had a tremendous amount of snow, or if you have a lot of drifting or you just have large piles, there's certainly the possibility that in some of those areas, snow mold could be bad enough where it could kill some patches of grass. Generally speaking, it is that fungus is feeding on the foliage. so that crown tissue of the grass is left alone, it's just going to be slow to green up. And I think this year we're actually going to see a lot of it because we had, pretty early snowfall, so the ground really wasn't frozen in some areas, and snow mold temperatures right around freezing along with moisture are ideal for this one. So when you get snow drifts or snow piles, as they start to melt, you have all that free water and those temperatures are again near freezing. Perfect environment for it to grow. What a homeowner could do in those cases, if you can spread out that snow somehow, that would help. Really, all you're trying to do is dry up the area. If the snow is gone, even a gentle raking. You don't want to be aggressive on wet soil because you're going to end up pulling out your grass. But even if you can fluff it up a little bit, just to help dry it out, that will work. If you have a continual issue with snow mold, some people will reduce their mowing height later in the growing season. Maybe that last mowing, they might drop it down to say 2.5 inches or even down to 2 inches. I wouldn't go any lower than 2 inches, but that can help as well.
Okay.
See, we had
Randy,
another email question. Oh, go ahead, Bridget.
Well, we want to make sure we get that email question first, if you could, Justin. After that, I do have one to follow up with Randy.
Sure. One of our listeners was wondering, since we've been talking a lot about this borer beetle, the emerald borer, are there other invasive bugs that they need to worry about or will need to possibly in the future that could affect our area?
There are certainly others that are on the way. I know the longhorn beetle has been a concern for a number of years, and then again, I know there are others too that are in the U.S. that could potentially be a concern. So there are certainly others to be on the lookout for. And I think the key to remember here, you think back to Dutch elm disease that took out the American elms. We have emerald ash borer right now. If you can diversify if you live in an urban area, diversify the trees that you have in your yard. If you're on a rural property, try to diversify the trees that you have. That way, when that next pest will come, and at some point it will, you're not going to be losing all of your trees.
So, Randy, I'm speaking along those lines of trees. I'm going to ask you for a favor. We have had callers calling in our morning spots asking about shelter belts. So they see shelter belts being removed from farm fields. And my reply was, those shelter belts, some of them are pushing 100 years old, certainly at least 80, and they are not as healthy as they once were. Farmers are going ahead and replanting trees as time allows, but do you have a resource you could send me that I could post on our Weather and Ag Facebook page about what trees would be most favored for the region if someone wanted to be replacing trees, not only maybe in the shelter belt around their yard, but also maybe out in an agricultural area? So if you've got a resource like that, could you share that with us?
I sure can, Bridget. I will do some checking. It's a great question because you're right. Some of those shelter belts were really old and just needed to be replaced. Others, when ash trees were planted widely for shelter belts, a lot of those were suffering over the years too, and really never reached their maturity. And certainly we've seen a lot of blowing soil over the past few years. So getting those replaced would be great.